On that rainy Friday morning, a woman knelt on the cold floor of a mansion, holding her sick child in her arms as silent tears streamed down her face. Between her trembling hands, an antique box held secrets she never imagined discovering. And when the owner of the house appeared at the door and saw the scene, time stood still. What he found inside that box was not just a memento from the past. It was the truth about everything he thought he knew about his own life. What happened next would forever change the destiny of that invisible woman and the heart of that powerful man. Subscribe to the channel for heartwarming stories every day. The rain was pouring down on the city that Friday morning. The sound of drops hitting the windows of the Albuquerque mansion created a sad, almost prophetic melody. Inside that immense house, with its wide corridors and crystal chandeliers, Rosilda worked in silence. Her steps were light on the polished marble. Her hands, calloused and precise, glided over each surface with the care of someone who knows a mistake could cost them their job. Rosilda was a black woman in her early 40s. Her body was tired, like someone carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders, but her eyes were firm, showing she had never given up. She wore an impeccably clean navy blue uniform, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she moved through the house as if she were part of the furniture, invisible, silent, useful. That day, however, something was different. Something made her tense, restless. In the kitchen, sitting on a chair too high for him, was her son Icaro, a 9-year-old boy, thin, with large, frightened eyes. He shivered slightly, wrapped in an old blanket Rosilda had hidden in her bag. The school had called early that morning. Icaro had a fever and was feeling nauseous. Rosilda had no one, no neighbor available, no relatives nearby, and her employer, Dr. Murillo Albuquerque, would never allow her to bring her son to work. "This is a place of service, not a daycare," he had once said, with that cold voice that admitted no argument. But what could she do? Leave the boy alone at home, sick and feverish? Rosilda prayed softly, asked for protection, and brought Icaro with her. She hid him in the kitchen, out of sight, and asked him to be quiet. "Just for today, my son. Tomorrow, Mom will figure something out, just for today." Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel for moving stories every day. Rosilda returned to her work with a heavy heart. She cleaned the living room, dusted the furniture, straightened the cushions on the velvet sofa. Everything had to be perfect. She knew that. In that house, perfection wasn't a compliment, it was an invisible obligation. But as she worked, her thoughts kept returning to her son. Icaro was all she had. Ever since his father had abandoned them when the boy was just 2 years old, Rosilda had raised her son alone. She worked from Monday to Saturday, from 7 in the morning to 6 in the evening. She earned little, but it was enough to pay the rent for their small room in the back of a house in the outskirts and put food on the table. She never asked anyone for anything, never complained, never cried in front of her employers. But that day, something inside her was about to break. The morning crawled by. Rosilda finished cleaning the second floor and went down to prepare lunch, which she would leave ready in the refrigerator. That's when she heard a low moan coming from the kitchen. She rushed there and found Icaro lying on the floor, pale, cold with sweat. The boy had fainted. "Icaro! Icaro, my son!" she cried, kneeling beside him. Panic seized her chest. She picked the boy up in her arms, felt his warm body against hers, and started to cry. She cried as she had never cried before. She cried from fear, from desperation, from accumulated exhaustion. She cried because in that moment she realized how alone she was in the world. It was then that she heard a noise, the side door of the mansion opening, firm footsteps echoing in the hallway, and a deep, familiar voice that sent a chill down her spine. "What's going on here?" Rosilda lifted her tear-streaked face and saw Murillo Albuquerque standing at the entrance to the living room. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was traveling. He wouldn't be back until Monday. But there he was, in a dark suit, his gaze piercing, observing the scene with an expression she couldn't decipher. And it was at that instant that everything changed. Rosilda had never been one to talk much. She had grown up in a humble family in the interior of Minas Gerais, where she learned early on that poor women had no right to a voice. They had to work, care, serve, and that's exactly what she had done her whole life. At 15, she came to São Paulo looking for work. She stayed for free at a distant aunt's house, sleeping on the living room sofa. She worked as a nanny, a saleswoman, a kitchen assistant. She met a man who promised the world, married him while pregnant, and was abandoned before her son turned 2. Since then, it was just her and Icaro against the world. Rosilda started working at the Albuquerque mansion almost 5 years ago. She was recommended by an acquaintance from church. The interview was quick. Donna Eliane, Murillo's wife, looked her up and down, asked a few questions about experience and hours, and hired her without much conversation. "You start Monday, 7 in the morning. Don't be late." In the first few months, Rosilda thought it would be difficult. The house was huge, 3 floors, 7 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a garden, a pool, a garage for 4 cars. But she learned quickly. She memorized every corner, every habit of her employers. Donna Eliane liked the towels folded into perfect triangles. Dr. Murillo couldn't stand noise in the morning. The couple's son, a 16-year-old, lived locked in his room playing video games and never spoke to her. Rosilda accepted everything in silence. She did her job with dedication, returned home exhausted, helped Icaro with his homework, prepared dinner, and slept with the certainty that the next day everything would start again. She didn't complain, didn't envy, didn't wish for her employers' lives. But sometimes, when she dusted the expensive furniture, when she saw the framed family photos on the walls, when she heard the laughter from the dinner she had prepared herself, she felt a pang in her chest. It wasn't anger, it was just the sadness of someone who knows they will never be seen as a person, only as a function. Rosilda had small dreams. She wanted Icaro to study. She wanted him to have a better life than hers. She wanted one day to be able to rest without the fear of running out of money. But she didn't talk about it with anyone. She kept it all inside, like she kept the clean clothes in the mansion's closets, folded, organized, invisible. Her days were all the same. She'd wake at 5 a.m., make Icaro's breakfast, drive him to school, then catch 2 buses to the upscale neighborhood where the mansion stood. She'd slip in the back door at precisely 7, cleaning, cooking, ironing, laundry. Lunch was always alone in the kitchen, silent, quick. She'd leave at 6 p.m., take the same 2 buses back, pick up Icaro from the neighbors, and get home after dark. On weekends, when she wasn't working, she'd take the boy to the small park near their apartment. She'd sit on the wooden bench and watch him play. Icaro would laugh, run, climb the slide, and in those moments, Rosilda would smile, a tired smile, but genuine. It was all she had, and it was enough. But on that rainy Friday morning, when she saw her son collapse on the kitchen floor, when she felt the weight of his warm body in her arms, when she heard her employer's voice echoing through the house, Rosilda knew her life was about to unravel, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Murillo Albuquerque was a self-made man. At 48, he commanded a real estate empire he'd built virtually from scratch. He came from money, true, but he was never the type to coast. He worked hard, invested wisely, expanded his business. He owned apartments, office buildings, developments in 3 states. He was respected, feared, admired. But Murillo was also a distant man, cold. He spent more time in meetings and traveling than at home. He barely knew his own son. He spoke even less with his wife, and the people who worked for him, the driver, the gardener, the housekeeper, were just functional cogs in his machine. He paid them well. That, to him, was enough. Eliane, his wife, was different. Not better, just empty. Her days were filled with beauty salon appointments, lunches with friends, shopping sprees. She treated Rosilda with a perfunctory politeness, never respect. She called her girl, never by name. She'd leave handwritten notes with orders. Girl, wash the living room curtains. Girl, iron the doctor's shirts. Girl, don't forget to water the plants. Rosilda obeyed silently. She knew it was pointless to expect more. This was the dynamic. She was the employee. They were the bosses. And that was how the world worked. But there was something Rosilda didn't know. Something buried in this family's past. Something that, if it came to light, would change everything. Decades ago, when Murillo was still a child, another woman had worked in this very house. Her name was Celia, a black woman, strong, with a wide smile and calloused hands. Celia cared for Murillo while his mother, Mrs. Gloria, traveled constantly for business. It was Celia who rocked the boy to sleep. It was she who bandaged his scrapes. It was she who comforted him on scary nights. Murillo adored her. He called her Aunt Celia. But when he turned 10, Celia disappeared. One day she was there, the next she was gone. The boy asked his mother, who replied coldly, "She left. Don't ask about it again." Murillo never knew what happened, and with time, he forgot. Life moved on. He grew up, went to college, got married, got rich. Celia became just a hazy, almost unreal memory. But the truth was far different. Celia had been fired because she was pregnant. Mrs. Gloria didn't tolerate that kind of situation in her home. She dismissed the housekeeper without notice, without severance, without mercy. Celia left pregnant, penniless, without references. She worked where she could, raised her daughter as best she could, and died poor at 52 of a cancer she couldn't afford to treat. That daughter was Rosilda. Rosilda never knew the name of the family her mother had worked for. Celia never told her. She took the secret to her grave, perhaps out of shame, perhaps out of bitterness, perhaps to protect her daughter from a truth too painful to bear. And so, by a twist of fate, or life's cruel irony, Rosilda ended up working in the very mansion where her mother had been humiliated and discarded. On that rainy morning, when Murillo entered the living room and saw Rosilda kneeling on the floor, holding her son in her arms, he had no idea of any of this. But something was about to be revealed, something he could never have imagined. Murillo stood frozen at the living room entrance, observing the scene. Rosilda was on her knees, her face wet with tears, cradling her unconscious son. Beside her on the marble floor lay a small, open wooden box. Inside were old photographs, yellowed with age, and a gold heart-shaped locket. Murillo's heart leaped. He knew that box. It had belonged to his mother, Mrs. Gloria. It was kept in the office closet, among old documents and sentimental items. He himself had opened it a few times years ago, when he still missed his mother. "Why do you have this?" he asked, his voice tight with tension. Rosilda slowly lifted her face. She was terrified, not of the box, but of her son. Icaro remained unconscious, his limp body in her arms. "Sir, I found it fallen behind the closet. Her voice faltered. "My son is sick. He fainted. I need help, please." But Murillo wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the open box, the scattered photos, the gold locket. A wave of anger surged through him. How dare she touch his mother's things? "You weren't supposed to touch that," he said, his voice cutting. "I know, sir. I'm sorry. When I saw the photos, Rosilda tried to explain, but her words came out jumbled, choked by sobs. Murillo took a step forward. He knelt and picked up one of the photos. It was black and white, faded. It showed a black woman in an apron smiling next to a small boy. The boy was him, and the woman... He frowned. Something about her face seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Who is this woman?" he asked, holding up the photo. Rosilda looked at the image, and for the first time, her tears weren't just from fear. They were from pain, from recognition, from a truth she had just discovered herself. "It's my mother," she whispered. The silence that followed was deafening. Murillo stood motionless, the photo trembling in his hand. He looked at Rosilda. He looked at the image. He looked back at Rosilda. "Your mother?" he repeated, incredulous. "Her name was Celia. She worked here more than 30 years ago." Rosilda swallowed hard. "I didn't know, sir. She never told me the family name. I only found out now when I saw this photo, when I saw you in it, as a child." Murillo felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Celia, Aunt Celia, the woman who had cared for him, the woman who had disappeared without explanation. He looked at Rosilda again, and for the first time he saw the same eyes, the same facial structure, the same delicate gestures. She left," he murmured, as if speaking to himself. "My mother said she left." "She was fired," Rosilda corrected, her voice firm despite the tears, "because she was pregnant with me." The words echoed through the room like thunder. Murillo recoiled, stunned. He suddenly felt small, fragile, lost. The entire structure of his life, of his certainties, began to crumble. And then Icaro whimpered softly. The boy came to, his eyes still closed, trembling in his mother's arms. Rosilda held him tight against her chest, desperate. "Doctor, please! He needs a doctor!" And in that moment, Murillo Albuquerque saw before him not the invisible cleaner anymore. He saw a woman, a mother, a daughter. He saw the echo of Celia. He saw the injustice his own family had committed, and he felt something he had never felt before, shame. Murillo said nothing more. He took out his phone and called the family's private physician. He asked him to come immediately. Then, with stiff, awkward gestures, he helped Rosilda to her feet. He held Icaro in his arms. The boy was light, warm, fragile, and carried him to the sofa. Rosilda followed in silence, still trembling. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to think. Everything was too confusing. The discovery about her mother, the fear for her son, the presence of her boss there, holding Icaro as if he cared. The doctor arrived in 15 minutes. He examined the boy, took his temperature, asked questions. He diagnosed a bad flu, dehydration, exhaustion. He prescribed medication, rest, and asked Rosilda to monitor him closely for the next few hours. Murillo paid the consultation fee. He sent the driver to pick up the medicine from the pharmacy. Then, for the first time in 5 years, he sat at the kitchen table and poured coffee. Not for himself, for Rosilda. She accepted the mug with trembling hands. She couldn't look him in the eye. She was afraid of being fired, afraid of being judged, afraid that all of this was just a momentary illusion and that the next day she would go back to being treated as she always had been, invisible. "Did you know," Murillo asked, his voice low, "that your mother worked here?" Rosilda shook her head. "No, she never said. She never spoke of the past. All I know is that she worked in private homes her whole life and that she died tired." Murillo tightened his lips. He felt a lump in his throat. "I remember her. I liked her, and yet they fired her." Rosilda's sentence wasn't an accusation, it was just a fact, but it stung Murillo like a blade. He didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. They sat there in silence, while Icaro slept on the living room sofa, covered by a blanket Murillo himself had brought. The rest of the day passed slowly. Murillo cancelled his appointments. He stayed home. He watched Rosilda care for her son with a dedication he had never seen in anyone. He observed her strength, her dignity, the silent pain she carried without complaint, and for the first time in his life, Murillo Albuquerque felt small in the face of someone the world considered lesser. That night, when Rosilda finally went home with Icaro, who was already better medicated and fed, Murillo was alone in the mansion. Eliane was traveling with friends. Their teenage son slept early. The huge house seemed empty, cold, lifeless. Murillo went up to the study and opened the wooden box again. He took out all the photos. He looked at each one carefully. There were several of Celia, always in the background, always discreet, always smiling. In one of them, she was holding a baby Murillo in her arms. He must have been about 2 years old. Celia looked at the camera with that wide smile, her eyes shining with tenderness. Murillo vaguely remembered that day. He remembered her scent, her lap, her voice singing softly to put him to sleep. And he remembered the day she disappeared. He had cried. He had asked about Aunt Celia for weeks. His mother always changed the subject, until he stopped asking and forgot. But now, looking at those photos, Murillo realized something he had never noticed before. His childhood had been built by hands he had never valued. Black hands, poor hands, hands of women like Celia, like Rosilda. The next day, Murillo arrived at the mansion early. Rosilda was already there working as usual. He called her into the study. She went, tense, prepared to hear she was fired. But what he said was different. "I did some research yesterday. I spoke with older members of the family. I found records." He paused. "Your mother was fired unjustly. My mother, she made a mistake. A mistake I can't undo, but I can try to fix it." Rosilda said nothing. She just waited. "I want to offer you something, not as a favor, as justice." Murillo took a deep breath. "I'm opening a foundation in my mother's name, but I want it to also carry Celia's name. The Gloria and Celia Albuquerque Foundation. It will be dedicated to working women, single mothers, children in vulnerable situations, and I want you to be the coordinator." Rosilda blinked, incredulous. "Doctor, I don't have a degree. I don't know how to—" "You'll learn, and you'll have help. You'll have a fair salary. You'll have dignity." He looked directly into her eyes. "You deserve this. Your mother deserved this." Rosilda felt tears welling up again. But this time, they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of something she never thought she'd feel. Hope. The news spread quickly. Murillo gathered the household staff, the driver, the gardener, the cook, and announced the change. He briefly explained the story. He spoke about Celia. He spoke about Rosilda. And he spoke about the need for reparation. Some were surprised, others moved. But everyone understood that something important was happening there, something bigger than employers and employees, something about humanity. Eliane, when she found out, didn't like it. She thought it was overkill. She said Murillo was making a scene, but he didn't back down. For the first time in years, he asserted his will. And Eliane, realizing she had no room to question, simply fell silent. Rosilda started working at the foundation 3 weeks later. At first, she felt lost. She didn't know how to handle meetings, spreadsheets, presentations. But there was a team to help her, and she, with the same dedication she used to clean a house, learned. She studied, she grew. Icaro got better. He returned to school, and for the first time, he had access to doctors, dentists, extracurricular activities. Rosilda saw her son smiling more, playing more, dreaming more. And she herself, little by little, began to smile again. One day, Murillo called her for a conversation. He handed her a box. Inside was the gold heart-shaped necklace that had belonged to Celia. "This is yours," he said. Rosilda took the necklace with reverence. She ran her fingers over the cool metal, and for the first time since her mother's death, she felt connected to her. She felt that Celia was there, that she saw everything, that she was proud. "Thank you, Doctor," she whispered. "No, thank you for reminding me of what truly matters." And in that moment, something changed between them. They were no longer employer and employee. They were two people, two stories, two pains that finally found healing. Months later, the Gloria and Celia Albuquerque Foundation was fully operational. It served dozens of families. It offered courses, psychological support, childcare, legal aid. And Rosilda was in charge of it all. No longer in the navy blue uniform, but in simple, dignified clothes, chosen by herself, Icaro was growing up strong and healthy. He attended a good school, funded by the foundation. He dreamed of becoming a doctor, and Rosilda, whenever she saw him with his books open on the table, felt her heart overflow with gratitude. She never forgot where she came from. She never lost her humility. She still woke up early. She still worked hard. But now, her work had a different meaning. It was no longer about serving. It was about transforming. Murillo had also changed. He became more present, more human. He started looking into the eyes of the people who worked for him. He started listening. He began to recognize that wealth isn't measured in money, but in dignity. A year after that rainy Friday morning, Rosilda returned to the mansion, not as an employee, but as a guest. Murillo had organized a small luncheon in Celia's honor. There was a photo of her on the wall, and next to it, a plaque with the words, "To the memory of Celia who cared for those who now learn to care." Rosilda stood still before that image. She touched the necklace she now always wore around her neck, and she smiled, a calm smile, complete, because she knew her mother's struggle hadn't been in vain, because she knew her own struggle had meaning, because she knew that, even invisible to the world's eyes, women like her and Celia always were, and always would be, giants. And that's how this simple woman, who just wanted respect, showed that true brilliance isn't in gold, but in the soul. And you, what did you think of this story? What lesson did it leave you with? Tell us here in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. That way you won't miss any of our heartwarming stories every day.